Welcome to Game Set Matchup, the podcast where we talk everything partnerships, the good, the bad, and the ugly.
Welcome to Game Set Matchup, the podcast where we discuss all things partnerships. I'm your host, Greg Watts, and please welcome our guest today, Mekaela Davis, Chief Partner Officer at Trintech, a leading provider of financial closed and reconciliation software. Mekaela, hello and welcome.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Well, thank you for joining us stateside from Kansas, I might add.
Absolutely.
And it also sounds like you've got very British weather there as well.
We do. It's actually beautiful right now. We are in the little mid period here where it's pleasant, and then it's going to get really, really hot. So I'm enjoying it.
Oh, you're very lucky. Well, we're in the mid period here, and it's going to get very cold. So I'm very jealous. Well, look, starting with an overview and an introduction to yourself, perhaps you can tell our listeners a little bit more about who you are, your background, the business, and what led you into a career creating partnerships.
Yeah, I would love to. So I am Chief Partner Officer at Trintech, as you just kindly overviewed. But I would say there was a pretty long and winding path to that. I'm maybe one of those rare people that is kind of a career partner professional. So I've actually been doing this for a very long time, just in different capacities. And really started out in spaces that allowed me to gather so much knowledge cross-functionally to get to a place where I could bring all of that to the C-suite at an executive level, really focusing on partnerships. So, I mean, that path really, it took a few different turns. I've always been in software or consulting, pretty much for the last 20 years, and I'll age myself, but that's okay.
You started when you were 12, right?
Yes, I was 12, actually like 10 and a half, I think. But yes, and so I think one of the really cool things about, that journey, and this is one of the tips that I give folks that are asking about how do you climb the ladder in partnerships specifically, is really that I have been able to sort of traverse so many different functional areas of business and learn those just enough to be dangerous or really dangerous in some cases. And you
I saw
really
that.
just kind of able to combine all of that into something that allows you to frankly operate a business inside of a business, which is what I think of as the partnership model. So yeah, it's been interesting. It's been rewarding and exciting, and so much learning and growth along the way, which never stops.
You mentioned a few twists and turns. Tell us a little bit more about
Yeah.
those twists and turns. How did you get to where you are?
Yeah, I started out actually working in the subprime mortgage business as
Oh,
an analyst. And I did that for a very brief period out of college. And then that whole subprime crash really forced me out of that. And so immediately started at a software company that was a little bit smaller, but global, right? So there was some interesting, dynamic movements within that environment, small enough to affect change and really learn, but big enough that you had some impressive customers and some good learning experiences along the way. And kind of quickly moved through the ranks there. I did a little bit of marketing, a little bit of sales, and then ultimately partnerships. From there, I moved to Grant Thornton, where I was a national managing director, and led many alliances across the portfolio. And that was just an amazing experience because really everybody that you're surrounded by is just super smart, right? And I love being able to learn from people and lots of varieties of circumstances and challenges they're working through with customers, which is just amazing. And I loved that environment. I learned and grew so much in that space. And then ultimately was like, well, do I want to become an equity partner or should I move on to something else? And so that's when I went back into the software space. And here have really just been focusing on growing out Trintech's partner channel. And really beyond that, creating a culture that's partner centric, which in turn also means a culture that's client centric, right? So that's what I would say I spend most of my time on is really just impacting the business as just as much as it is, working with partners and the clients that we serve.
well, this leads us really nicely on to the next question because I really want to ask because I know that our listeners will be keen to hear. How have you seen approaches change when it comes to creating partnerships? You talked about the twists and turns getting you into partnerships. And what would you say does a gold star partnership look like for you?
I think it has changed over the years,
Mm.
actually. So something that my team and I, regardless of where I've been, what role I've been in, what we've always focused on is value over volume. And that's something that you'll hear, me, my team say quite a bit, value over volume. We're not concerned about amassing a large number of partnerships. It's more about really digging in and understanding which partnerships are mutually beneficial to the extent that we can really focus on them, and they can drive results for our end users and for all the stakeholders that are involved. I think that notion, that ethos is starting to permeate beyond, beyond partner teams, beyond SaaS companies. I think that is being embraced to a higher extent than before, where folks are really saying we just need to focus in on value instead of lots and lots of partnerships that we don't manage well because it's hard to be in so many places at once.
Mm.
So I think that's one theme that is certainly changing. I'm seeing change, and take shape. The other is obviously the technology landscape has changed so much over the last 10 years that it just alters the way partnerships are experienced, I think, on both sides. Um, of the line, right? So whether it was the big shift from on-premise to cloud for the folks that
Yeah,
remember that, that are not,
yeah, yeah.
too baby in the ecosystem, but the big shift from on-premise to cloud changed the way that we partnered, and it changed the way that programs were defined and laid out and rolled out and experienced by partners in an ecosystem. And I think now with the big, shift towards agentic AI, we have even more changes that are coming that we're seeing. I know one of the big enterprise vendors just this week announced an agentic AI marketplace, for
Mm.
partners, right? So I think we're going to see so much more of that. There's just going to be a change in the way that we are experiencing partnership, and the KPIs that we're tracking in terms of what makes a partnership good are just going to be different, because of technology, because of the ruthless need to prioritize relationships, and many other factors. But those are the two that stick out for me, is just focusing on really good fit and also navigating the changes that are coming through just the general technology landscape.
You're going to find this really annoying, but I will ask it. What's your definition of really good fit?
Really good fit. So to me, it all comes back to what is the premise for partnership? And I would take
Mm.
a very broad, swipe at that definition, right? To me, it's not just, SaaS partnerships or technology partnerships. Anytime that there is a stakeholder or a consumer on the other end of an engagement between a couple of parties that would benefit from them working together versus apart, I feel like that's a partnership.
Yeah.
So there may or may not be a contract in between those two or more parties. It may be a looser arrangement, but at some point, if somebody's benefiting from, let's use the example of two entities working together, if there's a benefit to a consumer or to an end user or to a third party because of that dynamic, you have found yourself in a partnership.
Mm.
So that could be, a SaaS partnership between two vendors. That could be a child who benefits
Yep.
from the copacetic and collaborative co-parenting of his divorced parents.
Hmm.
There are so many different things I think that can be on the other end of that, but I think that's probably something that us partner people see differently when we scan a room, and we scan, just general parts of our lives, is that there are so many opportunities for partnership. It goes beyond, the four walls of your office building and kind of the confines of what your strategy is leading you to do from a professional standpoint. And you can weave all of that into that work too, right? But partnerships are everywhere. They're everywhere you look.
That's such a good summary. I think we had a podcast guest recently. I think it might have been Uber, and I was asking them the question, "What's the difference between a partnership and a sale?" And they said pretty quickly. They said, "Well, a sale is a one-time transaction, whereas a partnership, like any partnership in life, as you were talking about, is something long-term. It's more than a one-off. It happens multiple times. It's in there for the long run. It goes up and down. It has twists and it has, you know, twists and turns. But a sale is very much one time, but a partnership is really getting to know the other person or the other people or the group, and then, you know, really aligning values and challenging, and maybe there's some conflict, but ultimately you're kind of doing it together. What's your take on that?
Makes a lot of sense. And earlier you asked what's my idea of a good fit, of a good partnership. I think, that is the first and foremost requirement, is that somebody's benefiting from it.
Right.
I think a lot of times we are proposed partnerships, or we think through partnerships that don't make sense at scale. They might make sense in a small pocket, or even for one seller, right? If you want to bring it down to a very real example that a lot of us have probably experienced, where there's one seller who benefits from one person at a potential partner organization, and they think it should be a real partnership. But it has to be at scale. There has to be a greater, byproduct of positivity coming out of that dynamic for a larger group. So that's the first. I think, secondarily to that is culture fit.
Mm.
It is really, really challenging to manage even a productive, profitable partnership when the humans involved do not get along, or
Yep.
just in general, the two frameworks of the organizations are in conflict with one another. So I think that's a huge piece of the puzzle. Do we line up culturally? Do we see life the same way? Do we care about the same sort of end results and outcomes and metrics for our customer base and for our own employees, for that matter? Because it does come through when you're building a partner-centric culture, that you're going to align with multiple people inside of an organization, and you want that experience to be consistent. So I think that's a big part of it, is culture, right? So scalable, positive outcomes are there. You have a great culture fit. I think the other piece is, and this seems simplistic, but I think it's very real. Are we both, dating our number one, or is this
Right.
like, am I your side hustle and you've got
Right.
5 or 6 in front of me? It matters. It doesn't always have to be the same level of need. Like, I don't need to have this partnership in my ecosystem as much as you do in every single case, but there has to be an awareness of that, right? So I think that's a piece that we often overlook, or maybe we don't want to talk about it because it's a challenging subject. But when we think about channel conflict and things like that, how many vendors do you have in your ecosystem doing the exact same thing? And where do I fall into that? Like, I actually want to know that up front.
Yeah.
I think it's a fair question to ask. And as long as everybody is clear on the reality, your likelihood to be disappointed is much lower, which I think is best for everyone.
Why do you think that's such a good point about, you know, asking what is a reasonable question up front? You know, where do I fit amongst other
Yeah.
partners in this? And how many similar partners to me do you have? Why do you think some people would shy away from either asking the question or answering the question?
Yeah, I think they probably shy away from asking it because they're afraid that it will kill the likelihood of success. And
Hmm.
what I think of as an example is, like, you as a podcaster, Greg, and you've probably heard this before, where if you have an interest in becoming a podcast host or doing anything in sort of the social stratosphere, you'll hear a common fear is, but there are already so many people doing it.
Right.
But you bring something very unique to the consumer ecosystem, and you'll bring something new, and you'll potentially eclipse a lot of those people that have already been out there. And I think partnerships are the same. Just because you're starting at a lane 5 doesn't mean you can't end up in lane 1. And you can't be afraid of that, that co-opetition, if you will, right? There's an opportunity there to start out as maybe an opportunistic sort of partner, and really earn your keep and show them what you bring that's different, unique, and reliable, frankly, predictable. That will move you across lanes pretty quick. And I think that there's just so much upside to that arrangement. So that's why it's always curious to me when folks don't A, want to have the conversation,
Hmm.
or B, do not want to pursue a partnership because we're not immediately the number one. That's just not realistic.
It's really interesting, and we could talk about cultural stuff. It being very British. It's very British to not really ask the direct question. It's much more American to be comfortable with asking a direct question,
Yes.
but we talk about a direct question, but it's just a reasonable, straightforward question.
Yes,
So
yes, exactly.
I do
Yeah,
find,
and getting specific too, like so if there are other partners in this space that I'm going to be competing with, what do you like that they do? Like how do they behave in a way that is, beneficial to you as an organization? What do you like about what they're doing? What could use some work? Are there any areas that potentially you're not pursuing with that organization that we could, perhaps kind of backfill? And just getting an understanding of who's who in the zoo, as we say here sometimes. There's nothing wrong with that. Just like in a friendship or a job arrangement or anything else, like you should know where you sit, and where you have the potential to go. And it's okay to ask those questions.
well, this leads us once again on to our next question really neatly, which is for all the budding partnerships people out there, what advice would you give to your younger self starting out? Perhaps the do's and the don'ts of partnership creation and development, kind of touching on some of the pieces you've already raised.
Yeah, absolutely. So within my team, we actually have a framework for some of this, and I won't belabor all of those because there's essentially like 10, big blocks of truths, right? That we accept and we explore and we think about when we're doing business from day to day. But there's so many. I think going back to the importance of the cross-functional experience. I think it's really, really challenging to be a solid and capable partner professional if you don't understand all of the different functions that happen within a business and what the stakeholders within each of those functions could do to embrace partnerships or how they would benefit from partnerships. And to take that a step further, if you're thinking about your executive team and you're thinking about their KPIs and their goals, specifically aligning what you're doing with the partners to their end state, their utopian end state, and how do partnerships help them get there?
Yes.
There is a path for every single department to benefit from partnerships, from solid partnerships. And if you can be a good sort of steward and conduit to the notion and that end state where you help them get to where they want to be, you will, earn your keep pretty quickly and also elevate, not only the company as a whole, but the partnership function to a space where people see, no, this is something that improves every area of our business, which is exactly what it should do, right? It should not be sitting in a sales silo. Partnerships is truly an amplifier for all the things that we do well in a business. And as a partner professional, if you can highlight that, if you can expose that on a continual basis to the highest level within your organization, you'll do well.
That's such a lovely kind of metaphor to be a good steward for the organization. I haven't heard it described like that before because as a partnerships professional, you really are stewarding parties,
Yeah.
partners together, both internally and externally. That's a really neat metaphor and a very good piece of advice.
Is I think it's, I've never done ballet. I am not like the most feminine or graceful person, frankly, but I would
Neither
say,
am I. You're in good company.
thank you. I do think it's a bit of a dance, though. It really is. I mean, you're
Yeah.
constantly, moving back and forth between what does my internal organization need and want, what does my partner ecosystem need and want, and in the middle there is the right answer somewhere, but you're not going to fully satisfy both sides all of the time. So I do feel like you're walking a little bit of a line, sort of teeter-tottering between the outside world and your internal team, and it's not something everyone can do.
No.
And that's why I use that metaphor of being a good steward, because you truly are a really, really important liaison. Like your game of telephone exemplified, right? Like that's what you're doing.
Well, you really are. And again, that's a really lovely piece because you are walking that rope, whether it's a tightrope or just simply a rope, as in, I think there's quite a significant difference. As in, you're the only person who is connecting all parts either side of that rope. The reason I kind of shy away from tightrope is I don't necessarily think it's always a tight, a tightrope, but you are the only person actually trying to pull everything together on that rope.
Yeah, absolutely. And the pace of business changes, the strategy changes so frequently, and so you're always keeping up with what can feel like headwinds, I would challenge people to think of those as opportunities to do something new and reinvent the partnership at every turn, though. It's actually exciting when things change. That gives you a new sort of reset, an opportunity to reset and amplify what you're doing. But you have to keep up with those changes on both sides. I mean, it's truly, it is one of the more dynamic roles I could imagine. Having done a lot of, different things, I can't imagine a more dynamic role where you're getting just stimulus from every direction, right? As long as you know how to funnel that and what to do with it, it can be just a very productive and frankly, kind of amazing experience, not only for you as a partner professional, but for everybody in your company. If you can truly hone that in and turn it into some quantifiable, evident, positive outcomes.
It's well, again, linked to that and kind of coming on from this question, having created partnerships for a significant part of your career, what are your top tips when it comes to creating high performing teams and winning cultures? Because I know this is a topic that you're quite passionate about.
I am for sure. And again, there are so many different things. I feel like we could talk about this for hours.
Mm.
But I tend to go back to some basics actually. And this is something that, when we onboard new folks onto our team or we bring in seasoned partner professionals that have also been doing this for years and years and years, there are a few things that we all need to do, regardless of where you sit and what types of partners you work with and what your goals are. I think one of those really important things is tempo.
Mm.
So, what is both the operational tempo, but also the individual tempo within the partner organizations that allows sort of that free flowing communication to be both effective and timely to move the partnership forward at a reasonable pace. That sounds like a boring tip, but I think it's a really
No.
important tip. Um, because if we don't have a sort of a consistent across our teams, right? A consistent tempo expectation, but also a reasonable tempo within each of these partnerships. We're not getting that feedback that we just talked about. That feedback loop gets a little bit broken, and that's when partnerships in general start to break down. That feedback loop is so important. And not only are you thinking about what's coming from your primary contacts at a partner, you're also wanting to think about what's coming from their executives, what's coming from their product teams if you're in a SaaS environment. Like what is coming at you that you need to be attuned to shift and keep pace with the progress and the evolution of the partnership. So the tempo is huge. You don't want to talk too much. You don't want to talk too little. Like there's a reasonable amount of time that you should come back and connect. And not only that, what are the conduits and the vehicles for that connection? Some partners really like to text. Some partners like to use Slack. I think some partners still want to use email. I find myself like hardly ever being in my inbox, but I know it happens. And so, what does that look like, and how often are we connecting? Are we in a place where we can connect offline? Like, are we good like that? Are we sort of friendly in a productive way where you feel like you could reach out to me and you've instilled trust in me? I think that's an important one too. Not that you need to be out for drinks every night, but I do think it absolutely will catapult your ability to manage partnerships well if your key contacts at your partners feel like they would want to text you if they know that you're in the same place at the same time, out of town or wherever, to meet up for coffee, to meet up for a drink. If they don't want to do that, that's a clear signal that you haven't built that line of trust that's really critical to developing a long term partnership. So that's a boring one, but it's one that
No.
I think cannot be overlooked. It's a simple, predictable, I think, foundational way to make sure that we're connecting appropriately with partners and that we're doing that at scale within our team and it's consistent. We have that constant feedback loop coming in, which is so important.
Well, you say boring, but no one on our podcast, and I mentioned this to you just before we started recording, we've had well over 100 episodes now. No one's ever mentioned that actually. No
Oh,
one's ever
interesting.
yeah, no one's ever mentioned tempo in the context of being on the same page, using the same rhythms, using the same pieces
Mhm.
of software. No one's ever described it as tempo. I think that's a beautiful summary because it is working at each other's tempo, being in sync, being in rhythm, and actually, simply does this partner prefer, as you say, to send a Slack message or WhatsApp or email, or do we move faster than them or slower than them? What's their pace? How do they like to communicate? How do they like to measure? Do they like QBRs? Do they like to do stuff in person? Do they like to do stuff over Zoom or whatever? How do they like to work? No one's ever summarized or articulated it as tempo. So that's the first.
Yeah, it's you know, there are certain things that you want to do consistently as a team, you know, and across your ecosystem. If you're, you know, chief partner officer, you have multiple partners, you're managing an ecosystem at scale. There are certain things that you want to recreate across every partnership, just bare bones, basic blocking and tackling. And then there are certain things where you just have to allow some creative freedom. And I think the tempo is a good mix of both of those because it's we're connecting, we're communicating, you know, we are consistently providing a feedback loop with one another, but the way we do it might be very different. And so I would encourage folks not to box folks in on their team to such an extent that they don't have that creative freedom. You really have to be able to meet the partners where they are, especially if you're in lane 5 and you want to be in lane 1. You know, that's certainly an area where you have to be a little flexible and connect in the way that they want to connect. And then when you're able to scale that outside of the partner people in your organization, and your sales team is doing that, your leaders are doing that, your executives are doing that with your key partnerships, then you have built something that is, you know, more of a beautiful machine. And that's really going to produce the results. But you have to homeroom it within the partner team and really get that off the ground in a way that others can see, replicate, understand. And then it becomes, you know, sort of a multifaceted, multifunctional relationship. And those are the ones that don't come along all the time, but when they do, it changes the trajectory of your organization.
It's like an orchestra, right? You know, you decide you want to pull together a group of people playing musical instruments. You get them together. You start to give them the sets of music. They start to play it. They get it out of tune, then they get it back in tune. Then you've got the conductor, and then but all of a sudden, after a long period of time and lots of effort, everyone is in tempo. Everyone is playing in symphony.
Yes.
From the executive team all the way through, but that takes time, effort, alignment, conflict, ups and downs, clear communication, but all based on this foundation of trust.
Absolutely. And the power of that goes beyond just having really good partnerships internally. You know, if you're at a reasonably sized company and you achieve one or two or a few of those partnerships, you've just created an acquisition target for yourself, right? So I think that's one area where partner professionals, you know, open the aperture a little bit of what you do for the organization. So you're not just creating partnerships to, you know, to enter opportunities and have bookings and create sales opportunities. That's a very small facet of what you should be doing. If you're thinking about partnerships and what you bring to the table at the company level, you have the opportunity to grow and change the business in a way that makes it become a target for others because they think, well, look what they've done. Like, this is amazing. They have such a good relationship with, you know, this vendor, and these products they're putting out are innovative and you know, they really own the space and those kinds of things, right? So, you know, as a partner professional, you have a big role to play in that. That's not something a CEO can necessarily do, by the way, unless
No.
you're willing to have one of those rare CEOs that is a partner, you know, a partner person in life's past, which is amazing. But you know, most of the time they're coming up through different ranks, and so you can bring something new to that CEO's footprint for what he or she expects to see in terms of the strategic direction for the company and what the possible outcomes could be for their tenure, you know, as well as the company's sort of final destination, right? Which is very cool.
Well, that's something we haven't touched on, which is it does make absolute sense that the chief partnership individual, the chief partnership officer, would have a natural path to becoming CEO. Because he or she doesn't, does by definition of his or her role, know all parts of the organization and not just knows them all, but actually orchestrates them all together and has good relationships with all of them. So there's
Yes.
something in that.
Absolutely. So not only do you understand, you know, sort of cross-functionally within your organization how everything works, you're getting, a really good backdoor look at the way all of these partner organizations work. So you're not only seeing a template for one company, you're seeing a template for multiple companies, and you start to understand what drives them, how they navigate through it, what things were successful, how did they come out on the other side, and what moves are they making. There's an incredible amount of power in that if you're absorbing it, and if you're using it to grow your skill set and to tune your capabilities. I would say there's an absolute path for a chief partner officer to become a CEO. Um, and again, you're running a mini business inside of a business every single day. So you're
Exactly.
just doing it on a little bit different scale, but you have to command,
Not
knowledge in all parts. Yeah.
You're still running it on pretty significant scales, actually, and multiple, because it's multiple partnerships, and they're often pretty huge. So
Right, that's right. Yeah, and if you're doing an amazing bang up job and you've got, 50% of your sales coming through the partner channel, you've definitely created something there that is scalable on a much larger level. So I think this, the shift that we see to placing partner professionals in the C-suite on the executive leadership team, I think is just one step in a much bigger journey that's ahead for this profession, where you will see folks like that sitting at the top because they have, frankly, just access and have amassed an incredible amount of experience and knowledge that would be hard to get to otherwise.
I think so. I think so. It's well, to round us off, one last question, if I may. What does the future hold for businesses when it comes to creating partnerships with each other? And what, if anything, will you and Trintech be doing differently?
Oh, I think the future is just endless possibility. And I
Hmm.
say that because I think, some of the other changes that we talked about earlier, like AI and the way that we're working becoming so much different. Not only does that help us get to the ideal partner profile and the ideal relationships so much more quickly, we can also use those technologies to help us understand what are the actual outputs of the partnership that the market wants to see, right? So there's ways that we can incorporate AI into our typical, tempo and procedures in a way that gives us a fast path to answers on what the market wants and needs. That should, in theory, accelerate everything that we're doing together, whether it's developing products, being seen at industry trade shows, things like that, right? It short circuits sort of the ideal answer for a lot of partnerships and allows us to get there faster. So I just think the pace is going to change so much. That's one thing that I'm really kind of looking toward, is how fast are these things going to move. I think on the flip side of that too, though, you're also going to see partnerships that aren't serving, kind of be killed pretty quick, right? I think that will be apparent. We'll no longer do the thing where we sit around and we let some of those partnerships that are fledgling kind of stay on our books for a long time. I think that's going to move to the wayside pretty quick. Everyone's going to be racing towards this better fit and more quick yield, I think, on the investment of the time together and of the piece of paper, if there is one, right? I think we're just going to move much more quickly. It's just going to change. It's going to change how we experience partnerships and our ecosystems as a whole.
Well, everything's at our fingertips now, literally, particularly with AI. You ask it a question, you could even ask it what's my optimum partnership strategy, or what's my optimum corporate strategy. You can ask it now and it'll give you some pretty good answers.
Absolutely. And not only that, just, actually using tools to manage the partnerships that you have on your books already, right? Like we have a lot of efficiencies that we use within our team, driven by AI, where we have absolutely the human component, which is so important, but some of these things allow us to just provide better care and feeding on an ongoing basis, which we just wouldn't have had before. It was a much more manual lift, right? So I think that's going to be the biggest change, the biggest driver towards seeing things differently and experiencing partnerships differently within an organization and with the ecosystem as a whole. If we think about just the shift in marketplaces, even, we're going to move away from these API based product integrations, and we're going to be talking about agent to agent capabilities, which is pretty scary and cool. So I'm just excited to see. I think over the next 12 months, even there's going to be a big shift. But think about in 2 to 3 years what this is going to look like. It's going to be very different.
I remember when you mentioned on-prem earlier, I was thinking, gosh, those were the days. But it wasn't actually that long ago. We're
It
talking,
wasn't.
5 years, not ago, a little bit more than
Yeah.
that. And then talking about APIs are really relatively new, but they're already starting to become a little old-fashioned. But
Yes.
so all of this stuff is coming in and going out pretty quickly. It's kind of
Yeah.
scary.
It is. But if you know what it does is it just underscores the importance of having stakeholders across your organization plugged
Mm,
into partnerships. So, when it was on-premise software and even APIs, I think the product and the tech teams were able, I don't want to say take a back seat because you're engaged, you're producing product and it needs to integrate and do all of these things, right? So but I think now with AI, like you need to have somebody front and center, or many people front and center, frankly, to have those conversations about where you're going directionally, what your product or products are going to be capable of, and how it's going to benefit what the partner is producing. Because if you think about AI, we are back into a scenario where we're going to have service providers be product providers, right? So our big consultants that we're surrounded by are now going to be product people because they can be with AI, right? So what is your product doing, that earns it a stake at that table where they're not overwriting what you've spent all this time doing, right? So that's a big piece of it is your charter as a partner person changes a little bit because now you need to tell a future forward story instead of what can I do for you right now. It's what can I do for you now, but what am I going to do for you over the next few years as you build out your AI strategy and potentially you start to become a product organization. How do I save you time and where do I fit into that equation, right? Like we're going to have to start having those conversations. I know I've been having them for months now, and that is probably the number one request is just let's get together and let's have that conversation so we can see where our world of bots are going and are they going together? And it's not
Well,
just bots, obviously, but it's just in my head. That's the visual I see is where are we pointing our AI and how
it's
are we
exciting.
doing it together?
It's exciting. Well, Mekaela Davis, you've been so wonderful, and we could go on for a lot longer. But I just want to say thank you so much for sharing your advice and tips when it comes to creating partnerships, and your vision for the future as well. Bots or not bots, we will see. And thank you so much for being a wonderful guest on Game Set Matchup.
Thank you for having me, Greg. It's been fun.
Absolute pleasure. Take care. Bye bye.
You too. Bye bye.
Thanks for joining this week's Game Set Matchup. Tune in to hear more about the need to knows and the do's and don'ts when it comes to creating successful business partnerships.